Now to introduce the candidates in ballot order. Ballot position number 1, Geraldine Tyncy Miller, Republican. Ballot position number 2, Lois Parrott, Democrat. Ballot position number 3, Mark Wester, Libertarian. And for the first question, we're going to begin with Ms. Miller. The question is, if elected, what new ideas will you bring to the State Board of Education that haven't been proposed before? Ms. Miller?
What I would propose to the coming onto the board as something new. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to see the State Board of Education get back our authority, our governance authority over TEA. Right now, TEA has no citizen board accountability, if you will. That was taken away from us in 1995. So that's one of the first things I would do.
Thank you. Dr. Parrott?
Yes, one of the big issues is the funding, and I would have less money spent on standardized testing. That would give more money to the state funding. I would also like to put more money in early college and dual credit so that parents can even spend less money on tuition on their high school students going into college.
Mr. Wester?
I'm not aware of everything that's ever been posed before. However, I go back to an ideology put out called the tiny dot, and that's not necessarily that I have to do anything new. That maybe we have ideas or aspects that need to be perfected before we introduce any new concepts to work on.
Okay, for the next question, we'll begin with Dr. Parrott. What policies and/or standards would you propose to better incorporate technology in the classrooms? Dr. Parrott.
Right now, there are many standards that the State Board of Education are not following because they're based on bias. I'll make sure that technology is based on evidence and information that is correct and not based on the bias that many of the board members are presenting when they're put textbooks together, and that is what technology is used for. It's used for research.
Mr. Wester?
When we talk about policy and standards of technology in the classroom, I can agree with that on textbooks. Typically, what I'm aware of as being technology in the classroom is more along the lines of digital resources. You're going to need to use that microphone. Oh, okay, I guess I will try this again. Is something like smart boards, iPads, things like that in the classroom. And as a school that is one-to-one right now that I work at, it needs to be looked at because there are advantages and disadvantages to bringing technology into the classroom. Simply because we have new technology or we have things to replace a dry erase board or a paper textbook or a print textbook does not necessarily mean that they are better or more cost effective.
Ms. Miller, we've been asked to ask you to lean into the microphone so you can be heard.
All right.
It's now time for your response.
Now, okay. Can
Yes.
you hear me, everyone? Okay. All right. As far as technology, the Kindles have been approved as part of that falls under instructional material. For a long time, we've always not only had traditional print in books, but in the package that we have from the publishers, it always had DVDs and CDs so that they could do online work along with the traditional print. There is more and more technology coming into the schools, but at the same time, we do have to be careful and balance it so that we know that we're talking about quality control of the content of the technology that's critical to our children. Thank you.
For the next question, we're going to begin with Mr. Wester. And the question is, what is your opinion of advanced placement courses? Do you have any reservations about the curriculum or textbooks used in any of these courses?
To separate out the issues, on advanced placement, I think advanced placement is a great thing. I think if learners have an ability, then that ability should be met in the classroom in any way possible. As to developing curriculum and standards for that, as a libertarian candidate, that's where we begin to run into problems, is how are we effectively developing standards for advanced placed students who may need instructional capabilities outside of the norm, and how can you really begin to standardize that? We need to make sure that we're making all of the resources available to learners to include advanced placement. I think advanced placement is a great way for students to move ahead.
Ms. Miller?
Advanced placement, that is under the College Board, and we've had some issues on our State Board of Education just recently with the advanced placement U.S. history. The new framework we're very concerned about it because it's not balanced and it's not accurate. And so we have made it very clear to the College Board that we would, through a resolution, that we would like for them to work with our curriculum people and make sure that their framework is aligned with our state curriculum history standards, which we consider the best. Right now, our children shouldn't receive bias information. It should be accurate and error-free and obviously research-based. So as long as we can have that, we are absolutely supportive of the College Board and the AP, if you will, curriculum.
Dr. Parrott?
As a former Texas certified public school teacher and presently for many years a professor at Richland College, I support advanced placement. However, I do not support the Texas Board of Education taking over the content and looking at it with their biased opinions. For example, I'll give you an example. When they changed the word slavery to unpaid intern, do you really want that in the advanced placement? That's why advanced placement is being taken by more students. They don't want the social studies history curriculum. And if you don't believe me, I can show you the Texas Tribune and the Dallas Morning News articles. You can do some research yourself and find out the voting record.
For the next question, we'll start with Ms. Miller. The question is, should SBOE members be elected in nonpartisan elections? Explain your response.
I believe in partisan election of the State Board of Education. I realize local school boards are nonpartisan, but I think on the state level, I support partisan, if you will, elections and representative government. Thank you.
Dr. Parrott?
I think that the elections of state board should be partisan because the Republicans, as far as I'm concerned, they don't support public schools like the Democrats do.
Mr. Wester?
I think that's an awesome question, whoever came up with it. I actually think that partisan politics, by and large, are a horrible idea. The more candidates you have exposed in an election, the more their ideas stand on their own as opposed to their political party, allowing you to step away from the exact kind of divisive politics that we are dealing with in a nation today.
For the next question, we'll start with Dr. Parrott. When deciding what will be in our children's curricula, what do you consider the appropriate balance between relying on the knowledge of experts in the field in question versus your own?
Depends on the subject, for one thing, because I know what subjects I have taken courses in and graduate courses in, so I know my specialty. I would definitely depend upon experts, which would be graduates and people in the field that are considered experts with their education. And I know that recently, if you've been following what's gone on in the State Board of Education, they've turned down very reputable professors in fields. And this is what I disagree with, the way the State Board has handled that. What was the other part of the question?
Just what do you consider the appropriate balance, deciding what will be in our children's curricula, what do you consider the appropriate balance between relying on the knowledge of experts in the field in question versus your own?
Well,
So I think they're
understanding
really-
as a professional what is my opinion and what is fact. And that was on the TOS test when you're in the fourth graders learned that already. But it is very important to make sure that you understand what is evidence-based and factual-based when you place information in textbooks.
Mr. Wester?
Looking at the knowledge of experts versus that of my own, when in doubt, I always like to refer to someone who knows more than me. I think that's a great experience. However, when we're referring to curriculum, which is a sticking point for me, we have to look at knowledge of experts versus my own. Let's look at the balance of experts versus the experience of those experts. I can think of several instances in Kennedy's wonderful group of brain people where we had some very intelligent people who were put to work in areas where they had no experience and actually created some significant problems. And specifically speaking from a background, I'm talking about the Army Ordnance Corps and its ultimate decimation. So just because you put an expert in place does not necessarily mean that you're going to have an effective change take place. They need to be tempered with experience as well.
Ms. Miller?
For a long time, we have on our committees, our writing committees, when we update the curriculum standards, we always include or insist that we include active teachers as well as retired teachers as our experts. Then we have parents, we have retired businessmen. We try to balance it with a variety of people, but mostly our teachers. They're the ones that are in the classroom. They're the ones that are there every day, and they are the ones that teach the subject, and we look to them for experts. Sometimes we have to go out and bring in maybe one person as an outside advisor, but not when it comes to the overall balance of the committee, the writing committee. That has been our tradition for as long as I can remember.
For the next question, we'll begin with Mr. Wester. The question is, do you support the state of Texas funding and offering full-day pre-K for all eligible children? Mr. Wester?
Thank you.
Okay.
And feel free to run it into my time. That's a very good question. I have to ask where the funding for that comes from, how much of that comes from the actual taxpayers themselves. As a parent, I prefer to raise and educate my own children before I can put them into any type of schooling. However, my experience is not the same of everyone else. So that would be an idea I would need to contemplate more. At the moment, I really don't think we need to extend public schooling to before pre-K.
Ms. Miller?
The funding is an issue when you're talking about pre-K or K. I think that's something that we ought to, all the school districts should talk about and discuss if they want to make that step. But I am concerned about the funding and where the money will come from. And I believe in school choice. And where you educate your children, how you educate, it should be your individual right as an American citizen. Thank you.
Dr. Parrott?
Yes, I do think we should fund pre-K and K. There are many students right now that would be eligible for the program, but they don't even apply, and that is a shame. But it is so important to educate our children, and we need an educated populace. Good communities have good schools. Good schools create good communities. And I think that public schools are the cornerstone of democracy.
For the next question, we'll begin with Ms. Miller. The question is, what is your position regarding teaching of creationism or intelligent design in science classes?
We dealt with that when we updated the science curriculum a few years back. Basically, all theories are to be taught in a fair and equitable way. And our whole board, we had a strong majority on that issue.
Dr. Parrott?
Well, I think that evolution should be taught. I think that there's a difference between religion. Religion is based on faith, and science is based on evidence. So they're very different.
Mr. Wester?
Outstanding, and I'm going to agree with that. And I would also like to mention that we run into a problem when we look at every theory or every belief system being incorporated into a scientific classroom. Simply because you believe something does not, A, make it a scientific fact or theory, or B, make it acceptable to place in a public school classroom.
For the next question, we'll start with Dr. Parrott. The question is, do you think that charter schools are helping or hurting public education in Texas?
Charter schools are hurting and injuring our public school system because of the way that they're not being able to be shut down when they're financially not doing well. Plus, they take students away from the schools. And the problem is with charter schools, they send the students that don't do well, they cherry pick them, they take them back and put them back in the other schools. They don't take the tests that are the standardized tests at the charter school, they'll send them back. And then they're included in the regular schools, the public schools. So the public schools don't get to teach the students, but they get to test the students at the end of the year. And they suffer from, every district that has charter schools is paying for that, but they're suffering from their financial overall budget due to that. So if you start counting up and doing your research on charters and the success and failure of charters, there aren't any more successes in charter schools than regular public schools. They also don't do anything to help many of the types of programs like disabled and the students of special needs that are very important as far as I'm concerned, which we handle in public school settings.
Mr. Wester?
Do charter schools help or hurt? Well, in looking at some of the response on no financial backing, I would argue that financial backing becomes very interesting. When we look at an option of a parent to educate their child, no option should be restricted. I also believe that that child's money from taxes should follow that child wherever they need to go. Now, does that mean that charter schools are a correct solution? No. Does that mean that they're a horrible solution? No. Students should have opportunities to go other places and should have the ability to learn in other places if their parents choose that. As for financial accountability, I think it would be very interesting if we applied financial accountability across the board to a number of different school districts and we looked at things like that. That's certainly a big concern. Where is the funding coming from? Who's paying for it? And is that money actually following the students whose parents are paying for their education?
Ms. Miller?
I'm very supportive of charter schools. It's a choice, and it's a public-private school is what it is, and they've become very, very successful. And the KIP, Uplift, I can go on and on about the successful charter schools. The charter schools that end up failing are usually based on money. It's the funding issue. Because they have to go out and raise extra dollars, if you will, for their, since the tax base is what the public schools have and the charters do not. But they're doing some great things with great kids. They go into the poorest of poor and reach out to those kids. They require the parents to be involved in the school. And most of those kids are going on to college. It's amazing, the success rate with our charter schools. I'm very proud of them. Thank you.
Next question, we'll start with Mr. Wester. Do you oppose adoption of the Common Core curriculum in Texas? If so, why?
Absolutely. I oppose it for the same reason I've opposed any other curriculum standardization that's handed down from on higher. Curriculum and standardization, vertical, horizontal alignment in the classroom, etc., need to be decided A, by the teachers that teach that unit together, B, starting inside the school, and then C, in that school district.
Ms. Miller?
Common Core, I'm against Common Core. Texas has our own state curriculum that was mandated in 1983, and we have our own state test that is aligned to that, and that's in our law, okay? Common Core is a dumbing down of the curriculum of the reading, language arts, and math, okay? It is a federalization of our curriculum in all the 50 states. And fortunately, Texas, we're so far ahead and on the cutting edge of the curriculum and all the subject areas that other states copy us. We don't need Common Core, all right? Because we're far ahead and of the curriculum in our country. Thank you.
Dr. Parrott?
Well, Common Core will not align with the Common Core will not align with the essential knowledge and skills of Texas. So I oppose it, but also I do not think that it is a way for us to teach in our classrooms today, because the teachers are basically forced to teach to the test, which I'm opposed to, because what they're telling them to do, the principal has them put the objectives on the board, say, and they have to show them exactly how they would like multiply, say a third grader. And if they don't put the parentheses around it, like 4 times 4, or 4 times 5 is 20, then they have to get the answer. If they don't get the answer with the parentheses on, it's totally wrong and they get a 0. That's one of the questions in the Common Core. Well, you know, if you know the answer, it should be correct. But that is the way that math is being taught. They're learning some pre-algebra, they say, in the 3rd grade, which pre-algebra is fine. I mean, I'm for algebra being taught. And I think algebra being taken away from the high school, as was voted by, I'm not supposed to talk about my opponent, but I didn't agree with that. Common Core is a standard that is not as watered down as our state curriculum, believe me. We have watered down Texas knowledge and skills way too much as far as I'm concerned. But I am not for the standard of Common Core and the way it's taught, because the teachers are not able to do what they need to do in the classroom.
The next question will begin with Ms. Miller. Do you think that alternative certification programs are doing a good enough job at training Texas public school teachers?
We had a commissioner of education that came up through alternative education, one of our finest commissioners, Dr. Skip Mino. I happen to believe in alternative education. However you get to the classroom, come with your knowledge, come with your training, and you can do miracles in that classroom. Thank you.
Dr. Parrott?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Do you think that alternative certification programs are doing a good enough job at training Texas public school teachers?
Well, teachers in Texas, we have wonderful teachers, but we also have a situation where we have Teach for America, which is a 2-year program for teachers to teach. And we're finding that it's not a type of system that's working because they don't stay. And we have the biggest turnover of teachers in probably any state in the country. And we are really suffering for that. So alternative teaching, we do get some very good teachers, but we don't get teachers that last. And we really need people in the classroom that are going to be there for longevity. You really don't need to have a lot of turnover. And you can find the biggest turnover in large school districts, like right here in the Metroplex. And that is due to the alternatives, many of it, much of it, is a factor because many of the teachers are not wanting to really go in the classroom the first part. They just get a job teaching because they didn't have another job. So it depends on the person. But by and large, just to put someone in the classroom like a substitute for a while, I'm not for that.
Mr. Wester?
I have to agree with a lot of that, and I think the number she might have actually been referring to is about a 5-year turnover. I know in public schools that it's a lot of new teachers. If it's not 5 years, it's sooner than that is the turnover. I'm going to change metaphors or analogies in terms of certification. I teach in a private school, so I don't need to hold my certification. I can tell you I went in and took my all-level certifications, and the certifications are, quite frankly, a joke. So if we're already at that point, I like to think about a doctor. Would you like for your doctor, your primary health care provider, to be alternatively certified? If we're looking to increase education, we need qualified, capable individuals in the classroom held to a higher standard and paid that way.
For the next question, we'll begin with Dr. Parrott. Do you think that different tracks should be used in high schools, steering students toward either vocational training or college preparation, or should all students be given the same basic education? Should students in different tracks take the same standardized tests?
Right now, we have different tracks because students that are not able to take tests within the system right now, they can opt out of that. So I think we should have the Algebra 2. We should keep our standards high because as high as you keep them, the students will raise. They will raise the bar, they go there. I teach in college, I know that, I've taught in public school. If I lower my requirements, they'll do that. You say no, give no options. That's the truth. You say, okay, well, you only have to do 5 assignments, but if you're really a good student, you can do 10. They're going to do 10? No, they're not going to. So why would you do that as an instructor? Why would we do that to students? Don't you want them to have the opportunity? Do you want to start in the 8th grade and say to this kid, oh, well, the counselor did. The parents don't always know about their student either at that time in their life. We need to give everybody a chance, an opportunity to go on. Because once you get past that age, it's very hard to catch up. Why do you think we have 62% of our students at Richland College having to take these tests when they come in and going into developmental? Algebra 2, when they take it in high school, it's not even on the same level as college algebra. And now they're going to lower that? What they're doing with the State Board of Education is they're lowering all the standards, especially in math. And I've done a survey, by the way. It's anecdotal at this point because I haven't made it statistical.
Okay, Mr. Wester.
In a perfect world, we would be able to actually address tracking and standardization on the State Board of Education. It's a mixed bag. I can tell you right now, standardization, obviously you can tell by now I'm going to say is a horrible thing. As for tracking and vocational training, I can tell you as someone who took a vocational welding class from Bill J. Priest downtown in Dallas County Community College, that it was one of the most amazing programs I've ever taken. Now, I didn't have to take any standardized testing to do that. However, vocational training is something we need to be considering. Not every student who sits in a rank and file classroom is going to go on to work in a rank and file job. We have as many different needs in education as we do learners, and we are doing a disservice to the American population to mainline students into one approach of education. Not everybody is going to work in an office. Not everybody is going to work outside. There are as many different options as there are learners, and vocational training is a very important thing.
Ms. Miller?
If you followed the legislature last time, they came in with a brand new graduation plan. And they did away with what we call the 4x4, which was a pretty tough graduation plan, if you will. Of course, there was 3 actually plans, your regular, your distinguished, and your recommended. This new one was the very idea of what we're talking about here, is variety and flexibility for our students. They came in with creating a lower floor, if you will, of the basic requirements, 3, 3, 3, and then 4 of your English language arts. Then they have 5 tracks, or for us in college we called them majors, so you can pick which track you want to go down or go through. You can decide as in the 8th grade, if you would like. You've got counselors who are going to help you with that. the STEM, business, arts, technology, and then you can mix them all up together. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But that is coming straight from the legislature. Thank you.
For the next question, we'll begin with Mr. Wester. Should teacher pay be linked to student performance? Why or why not?
In a perfect world, I would be paid based on how well my students learn economics, government. In reality, and having seen the reality of both public and private school, that's almost an unrealistic expectation. I've seen classrooms where students have been placed with one particular teacher due to their outstanding classroom management, and I've seen kids, bright kids, moved out of classes due to poor classroom management. Until we can find a real way to come up with the rules and regulations of basing teacher pay on student performance, we're not really going to get anywhere. Do I think teachers should be paid more? Absolutely. If you want a healthy, smart country, you need to pay teachers like we do doctors. We need to have educated people in the classroom who are good at what they do with a support network there, and we need to financially incentivize them to do such.
Ms. Miller.
Well, this issue of accountability has started way back when House Bill 72 was created in 1983, asking the teachers to prove that the kids are learning. How do you do that? And how do you reward the teacher for children moving forward and gaining more knowledge? This has been very controversial since forever, it seems like. I do think that it's in the best interest of the school to come up with some kind of plan that the teacher can be compensated in some way for a child learning. I know Dr. Miles in Dallas is trying that, so it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. So, but I think there's potential to this idea, and I'd like to see how it plays out, if you will.
Dr. Parrott?
Well, you can see how well it's playing out in DISD. And I'm telling you, it's not. I am a teacher. I was on the DISD school board. I was president of that board for 2 years, so I am very aware of what's going on there. This is not the way to pay teachers. You go into teaching because you love the field of education. You want to make a difference. I am a teacher, and I know what it takes to teach children and adults because I've done both. And the paycheck and paying for a test, that's just not even the mentality that I ever was taught or thought of when I saw my mother go to work as a teacher, or my aunt, who started out as a one-room school teacher. This is just so opposing my even way of thinking about education. I have never been for it. I've stood up for the teachers ever since I ran for school board in 1992, and I've won 7 elections, and I've stood for the teachers every time against pay for performance, and I'll do it again.
For the next question, we'll start with Ms. Miller. As the population of Texas becomes increasingly diverse in terms of ethnicity, language, and religion, do you think the curriculum and textbooks the SBOE adopts should do more to reflect that diversity? Do we spend too much time teaching about males of European descent?
Teaching about males of European descent. Okay, that's sort of, all right. First of all, diversity. The minorities are in the majority in our public schools. We have over 5 million students in our public schools, and then it drops down to the Anglo, and then African American, and then others. I really believe that we have reached out, we continue to reach out to the diversity of our population. It is critical that our children learn English and learn it well, because education is the gateway out of poverty. And if you can't speak our language, then all it does is keep you from getting a job, keep you from a certain lifestyle that you deserve to have as a citizen of the United States. So I believe we're reaching out as much as we can. I would love to see not only bilingual education, but I'd love to see immersion into our schools as an opportunity for kids to learn English in a deeper and a more comprehensive way. Thank you.
Dr. Parrott?
Could you repeat the question, please?
As the population of Texas becomes increasingly diverse in terms of ethnicity, language, and religion, do you think the curriculum and textbooks the SBOE adopts should do more to reflect that diversity? Do we spend too much time teaching about males of European descent?
I think we need to reflect diversity. First of all, diversity doesn't just mean the definition we just heard. As far as minority doesn't just mean how many in number. Minority is a group of people who traditionally have been left out, and they were not part of the power. See, that's different. And you see in the books, and what the biased opinion of the Texas State Board has been doing, they even tried to pass a resolution to leave out any reference to Arabic and Muslim. They took out Romero. They tried to take out Cesar Chavez out of the textbooks. These are the things. I have records of articles, and you can look on your internet and find this information. I was just endorsed by the Texas Freedom Network last night at 9:30, so you can look at their website. You will see the quotes of the individuals on the board. You can see the individuals in this room, an individual, I'm not supposed to be like that in this debate, but you will find the information there, who said what and who's left out. When you're left out, that's when you're a minority. It doesn't have to do with numbers, it has to do with if you're not part of making any decisions.
Mr. Wester?
I think I'm going to speak to the concept of diversity in a way that I can, because I'm not really stuck to party politics. I'll address it the same way I address diversity of any type in the classroom. A, different doesn't mean wrong, and B, what we should be doing with individuals is treating everyone equally, but we cannot make them equal. When we talk about speaking English and not getting jobs, I teach economics, and one of the interesting things to look at is that within actually I believe it's within 2 generations, an immigrant family usually picks up English because they need to do so to become economically viable and maintain employment if they're going to move upwards in terms of mobility.
For the next question, we'll begin with Dr. Parrott. What changes, if any, would you make to current investment policies for the Permanent School Fund and to distributions for public schools? Please explain.
Well, recently they had given much of the funding to a private organization. I think it needs to be in the hands of the state board and the accountants there, because I don't really like the idea of that money going into privacy. That would not be my philosophy.
Mr. Wester?
When we talk about changes to the permanent school funding, first and foremost, I have to say allowing a politician to put their hands on any sort of a trust of money in any way, shape, or form is a horrible idea. As we've all seen with the budget surplus problems that we've had and kicking the can down the road by Congress, politicians are incapable of making the tough economic choices necessary in order to do the right thing because they're interested in being reelected. You want to manage the fund really well, why don't you have an expert with some experience actually manage the fund? Now, when we talk about the fund and changing it or managing it anyways, does that even really need to happen? Because I believe the last figure I saw, and I reserve the right to be wrong, was that it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $23 billion. I think that's doing okay.
Ms. Miller?
Our fund is now $38 billion. It tops Harvard University as the best educational endowment fund in the country. We're very proud of it. It was created in 1874 by our forefathers, and they said it's going to be a permanent school fund in perpetuity, and the revenue from the oil and gas investing into the corpus will go to provide free books for every child in this state. It is still there on the books. People have tried to raid that fund every 2 years in the legislature, and we have said no. Keep your hands off of it. It belongs to the children. It's not tax dollars. I have fallen on my sword over this issue. That money belongs to our children. It does not belong to anybody else, okay? And we have managed it beautifully and transparent, squeaky clean. I'll put it up against anybody, okay? $38 billion, and that goes to our children. Thank you.
Next question, we'll start with Mr. Wester. Do you think that high school classes should put more emphasis on critical thinking than in lower grades? Should adolescents be encouraged to challenge commonly held ideas in order to become more critical thinkers?
Wow, if only we actually could teach critical thinking skills in school. When we talk about standardization, and we talk about curriculum, and we talk about teaching to the test, and we talk about all the tests that we have to take, how often does critical thinking and critical thinking skills take place? I'm a mentor in a robotics team that just won a world championship. We encourage, as a matter of fact, if you can't think critically, you can't compete. Critical thinking should be encouraged on all levels. Questioning, thinking, learning, these are extremely important things. Critical thinking, I have, when I think of Bloom's taxonomy, I presume that there are teachers in the audience and we talk about the understanding of higher order thinking skills. I teach a senior level class and I don't think I have any lower level thinking taking place. It's all synthesization, it's all higher order thinking skills. You have to be able to think critically to understand and assimilate information in the world around you, and that's what our students need to be able to do.
Ms. Miller?
Critical thinking is what it is, critical thinking, questioning, and that is what our children need to learn how to do. First, they come in and learn the basics, and then they begin to question and go into the higher order thinking skills. And that is what our STAR test is based on now, more than ever. And some people don't like it, but it really is there. It's reached up to that level. And I think it'll be interesting to see how our kids deal with this in the next several years, you know. But absolutely, our kiddos need that. They need to think and question and analyze everything. Thank you.
Dr. Parrott?
I certainly teach critical thinking skills, and I think it's very important for our children to learn critical thinking skills. That's why I was so shocked when it was in the Republican platform that they oppose critical thinking skills. And as far as I'm concerned, there was an article October 7th, the Austin American Statesman said in 2014, and there's a copy on my table, and they stated that with the reforms, they call the reforms, why is it that this is the worst year in 20 years? Is it because of this new STAR test that we have students that have done so much more poorly in the SAT? Because there isn't critical thinking in the TOS and the STAR, even though we have board members who say that. It is not happening because students are learning how to do, they want the answers. I teach, I know. They say, well, how many of this do you need? They don't just write a paragraph. They say, how many sentences does it need? They want to just bubble in the answer instead of thinking about how do you get there? How, when, where, and why. They don't even consider that in writing a paragraph unless you teach them. In the 4th grade TOS, that was one thing they started to try to do that in writing in the essay. But by the time they get to college, I don't know where it's gone, but they want to just do fill in the blank, you know, or bubble it in. And that is not the way to teach. Critical thinking is.
Thank you, Dr. Parrott. For the next question, we'll begin with Ms. Miller. What do you think the top priorities of the State Board of Education should be? Do you think the current board has the same priorities you would have?
Well, first of all, our first priority is to do what the Constitution mandates, and that is to be the sole managers of the Permanent School Fund and make sure that we provide as much revenue, if you will, or money for our kiddos to cover all the instructional materials for over 5 million kids. That is our first rule, if you will, or mandate. We are, by law, over the curriculum standards, and every 10 years we update them on all the subjects. And it's always kind of rolling, if you will, kind of constantly. And then we review and adopt the textbooks, or now more of the technology emphasis, if you will, but it still means content, instructional content. So we make sure, and that's what we're doing right now, the history books are up for review and adoption. And at our November meeting, we will be voting on the history books and listening to more public testimony about and making sure they're accurate and error-free. Thank you.
Dr. Parrott?
I think the Texas State Board of Education is very necessary in the state of Texas, and especially I believe that they must make sure that the textbooks are written based on historically accurate information and not on bias, but on evidence and facts. And that is one of the main functions of the State Board, and also to make sure they write curriculum that is proper and also based on what the teachers need to teach, and align the curriculum, give the teachers more ability to be able to write their own tests that match the curriculum and involve the teachers more in the curriculum writing. And then the funding, of course, and also work more closely with the state legislators, because right now there's such a breakdown between the State Board and TEA, because the State Board has been seen as the laughingstock in the entire country, let alone the state of Texas. The state of Texas needs to be ranked up at the top, and right now I don't think we're quite up there in the shining star level, thanks to the star, and I want to bring us into a level that's not number 49 with state funding. I want us to go much better than that. That is just not going to make it. And I think we can. We can be a state that other states look up to, not just buy our textbooks.
Mr. Wester?
So when we look at the board's priorities, I have to say first and foremost, looking at it is to follow what's laid out in the state constitution. That's the most important thing. Secondly, presuming that massive change can take place, which I don't really think it can because it's a bureaucracy, focusing on bottom-up organization. Are we really focusing on teachers and students? Are we focusing on administration? Are we focusing on stadiums? Are we focusing on textbooks? As someone who has an economics background, I have to say, when we look at Texas leading the way in terms of textbook markets, that's why we're so important, because we are one of the largest school districts, and what we adopt, and as Texas, so goes the nation. Well, if you produce a textbook that's not really good and you have more free market options, people aren't going to buy a biased textbook. As a teacher in a private school, I pick my own textbook, and I provide it for my students, and I picked the best textbook I can find with the most factually based content that I can get to. I find it very interesting that we're talking again about standardization in relation to student ability, because those two are mutually exclusive. The more standardization we have, the more we deal with these things, the more we are shackling learners to one type of education in a classroom. We cannot give teachers freedom and have standardization.
For the next question, we'll begin with Dr. Parrott. With regard to the College Board's Advanced Placement U.S. History Framework for the 2014-2015 school year, what is your view of the framework, and what State Board action should be taken as a result of your view?
Well, since I don't teach the history at Richland College, I have seen some of the work on the computer because I actually have an office next to one of the professors that does teach that. I can't speak specifically, but I do know the advanced placement courses, and I think they're fine because I have been teaching alongside of this instructor. But as far as specifics, I would definitely want to look at it. If I were a history teacher, I teach humanities, which history is part of, so I think that I would use the instructors. If I were going to evaluate it, if I'm on the board, I will do that. I will have professors look at it, and I will talk to the teachers and find out more details and do the research.
Mr. Wester?
Can I have you repeat the question for me?
Sure. With regard to the College Board's Advanced Placement U.S. History Framework for the 2014-2015 school year, what is your view of the framework, and what school board action should be taken as a result of your view?
I'm going to kind of hint at where I think this is going, because this is like the second U.S. AP History AP History question we've had. So if this is, I presume that the concern over this is coming from some sort of acknowledgement or incorporation of diversity aspects into that curriculum. Because if that weren't the case, then we would be discussing the AP Science or any of the other AP courses that take place. As a result of that, without knowing specifically what they want looked at in the AP U.S. History, I as a libertarian can't say, oh, the state board should certainly spend $30,000 with 3 experts looking at the curriculum, because it's a curriculum. Unless I know specifically what that question is addressing, I have a real hard time saying that the State Board of Education should, A, waste taxpayer time and money doing anything about it, unless we actually know there's a problem there.
Okay. Ms. Miller?
First of all, College Board is a 501c3 private, has 9 members on it. They're all appointed. We don't know who appoints them. David Coleman is the new head of it, who was part of the author of Common Core. We have great concerns about what they did to the AP U.S. History. Before, it was just a very narrow framework, about maybe 6-7 pages, okay? They threw that out, came in with a 93-page, took out all the good stuff about America and made it all bias, over 29 bias statements about our country. They took away the exceptionalism of our country, all the world wars, all the Holocaust, Madison, one sentence for Washington. I can go on and on, but I don't have the time. Just to tell you that when we teach our kiddos history, it better be balanced. Yeah, there's some good times and bad times, but the kids need to have the information accurate and correct and error-free and balanced. You all, that is what we want, and that's what we're expecting from AP. Thank you.
For the next question, we'll begin with Mr. Wester. Do current curriculum and testing standards adequately address the needs of students who come from families in which English is not spoken in the home? Do you think there will need to be changes made in the future to adjust curriculum and testing to those needs?
I would say currently that I would say yes, anybody who is ESL is at a disadvantage. I think that that's relatively obvious. I run into the problem again with, do I support the standardization testing and curriculum alignment? Not necessarily. Hey, there's another great case. We have a large number of people who don't speak English as a first language, not necessarily Spanish speakers, but other languages as well. Is what we have in place set up to work for them as well? When we talk about inclusion in a public school classroom, is what we have working?
Ms. Miller?
English as a second language. I've spoken to this before. We have a strong bilingual program in Texas, and our kiddos are still not mastering English by the time they graduate, okay? So why in the world wouldn't we offer immersion? California did it back in the late 90s, and they have had some great results offering both bilingual and immersion. Their Hispanic families ask their kids, they said, we send our children to learn English to school. They can speak Spanish at home, but we want them to learn English at school. I think we should be doing the same thing. We can do it. There's no doubt in my mind that we can't do it. Our kids deserve no less. Thank you.
Dr. Parrott?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Do current curriculum and testing standards adequately address the needs of students who come from families in which English is not spoken in the home? Do you think there will need to be changes made in the future to adjust curriculum and testing to those needs?
Well, there certainly are needs for many students, and at this time it depends on which school district you're in, because some school districts have 50 languages that are spoken, some have even almost 100. So it depends on if you're talking about the urban district like DISD, or if you're talking about Allen, or if you're talking, this district that we're talking about, District 12, is a very unique district. It goes all the way to Wiley, all the way to Seagoville, all the way up to McKinney, Allen. It includes many districts, all the districts in Collin County, and they're not all the same either. Plano's changed a lot even in the last 2 years, the demographics. So yes, and there are many different languages. You just heard about what happened the other day with the area of Vickery Meadow in Dallas. They had problems even in the apartment complex getting the word out because there were about 40 different languages just in Vickery Park. When I was on the DISD school board, that's where I had 5 schools built in one of the bond packages. I have 30 seconds left. There is much more outreach that needs to be done because there are many families left behind. And I think that it's very important to teach language and to make sure that they are able to be learning English in the class. And I do like the idea of learning bilingual, but immersion helps along the way as well. And I have to stop. I was going to explain
Thank you.
our dual
Thank you,
language
Dr. Parrott.
program, which I'm
Dr.
for,
Parrott,
which
your time is
is
up.
working successfully.
Dr. Parrott, this will be the next to last question. And we'll start with Ms. Miller. What is the importance of the arts in education?
Oh, they're vital. I'm a major proponent of arts in our schools. It's a three-dimensional way for our children to learn and learn well the basics and to express themselves in a very creative way. We have a lot of great creative kids in our schools, and the more they can be exposed to the arts, to drama, to drawing, and to acting, it's just amazing. The depth of their comprehension, and all the research is coming out proving how much the arts is such a great learning tool for our kiddos. Yeah, I absolutely believe in the arts.
Dr. Parrott.
Well, I was a teacher. It was my first job as an art teacher in DISD, so I certainly like art, and I still teach at humanities and fine arts at Richland College. Art is a wonderful way to teach adults and children. It's a creative way of thinking, and I certainly love to do art myself. So I certainly promote the arts. When I was on the DISD school board, every year we put more money into the budget for the fine arts, for band instruments, and we certainly have a great program in DISD. We have one of the best fine arts programs with the Arts Magnet, which gets awards every year. So I promote the arts. I've always promoted the arts, and I will continue to do so. And I think that we need to have art in every single school, if at all possible, and fine arts, and have bands and orchestras and everything, because every child needs to have some creative outlet and learn that as they're young, and it goes through your whole life. And I see people in the homes when I go to speak about art at the retirement center where I live, and what they tell me is they're so glad they learned a musical instrument or they learned something in art because they can still do that. And my mother got Alzheimer's, but you know what she didn't forget to do? She could play the piano. And she continued to play the piano. And after she died, I went by the nursing home, and they said, that's one thing we really miss. We miss her playing the piano.
Mr. Wester?
This is my first response will be tongue-in-cheek for my friend Melissa. We should totally eliminate the arts program in Texas schools, completely. I have tried not to bring in my employer in this. I teach in one of, I think, 3 high schools in the nation that is actually inside of an art museum, where art is on the walls, sculptures in the hallways. The students are exposed to this. I don't think you'll find anybody who has any inkling of education ever say, oh yeah, we should cut arts funding. Yeah, that's not as important as football or math or science or anything else. artistic talent and the exposure to art is a different kind of intelligence. When we talk about standardized testing, that's part of the problem we have, is we're measuring one type of intelligence, and art is just as important as any other kind of intelligence and deserves an equal approach.
For the last question, we'll begin with Dr. Parrott. How do you feel about American exceptionalism and the idea that we should not question and grow from errors made in the past?
Repeat that last part. We should not, what now?
How do you feel about American exceptionalism and the idea that we should not question and grow from errors made in the past?
We should absolutely grow from our errors in the past. And we are a great nation, and I am very patriotic, and I believe in public schools because of my patriotism. Public schools are the cornerstone of democracy. I've said that before. But when people go around and talk about how we're so much better than everybody else, that would be the death of me in the classroom if I stood up there and said that to all my students from all over the world. Do you think they would listen to me for 1 minute? Do you think my art students would want to paint in my class or listen to me play any kind of music? I ask them, what did they like to listen to? I don't start and say, you have to listen to what I like. When you start telling students what they have to believe, I mean, that's one thing. History, we have to teach them the history. We have to teach them the bad things. That's why when they changed the word slavery to unpaid intern and took out the words and put Atlantic triangular trade instead of slavery, that is not what history is. That is not the facts. We must learn from the things that happened in the past. We need to teach the Holocaust. We need to teach all of these things so we don't have that repeated.
Mr. Wester?
That's an outstanding question. And as a sergeant, a former sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, I am more than happy to look whoever came up with this question in the face and say, patriotism does not belong in the classroom. When we look at questioning and growing from the past, most certainly we should do that. When we look at American exceptionalism, I have to ask some very interesting questions as an economics teacher. When we look at, I don't know, the Gini coefficient of economic freedom in the United States, or our birth to death ratio of infants, I can look at a number of things that we don't do very good at as Americans. However, one of the unique founding backbones of what I teach in an economics class is that we as Americans have an opportunity to succeed. We're not guaranteed success. When we start talking about putting patriotism in the classroom and public schools being a corner of democracy, people have a misnomer that we have had public schools since we were founded in the late 1700s. We haven't. Public education didn't exist for 100 years after that. We didn't have an income tax until we had the Fed. These things aren't, part of the creation of the country. They're something we've developed along the way. And ignoring the past and not questioning the past leads us down a very, very dangerous revisionist road.
Ms. Miller?
I believe in the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that was written in our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, which is the bedrock of this exceptional country. I'm so proud of our country. The older I get, the more I admire our founding fathers who fought and died for this great country, that we all could have liberty right here. Liberty and life and the pursuit of happiness. Y'all, that is so important. Someone said the other day, this is like a business plan about values. That is what our Declaration and our Constitution is about. Yeah, we've had mistakes, sure. We're human, okay? We're not perfect. But the beautiful thing, we can come back to the bedrock of what our founding fathers created. You cannot dispute that. It's a wonderful, wonderful foundation. And our children need to learn that and respect it. And we have that in our schools in Celebration of America Week every fall in every class. And our kids are going to learn how great our country is. Thank you.
We are now ready for the closing statements. which will be made by the candidates in reverse ballot order. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for the closing statement, and we'll begin with ballot position number 3, Mr. Wester.
I'd like to point, I also work in an information commons, what was formerly known as a library. So I actually came into a lot of my ideology from reading, surprisingly. I wasn't handed this by anybody. I'd like to point out a book by Rothbard known as Free and Compulsory Education that is an unannotated look at the history of American schooling and education in America. And I encourage everybody just to pick that up and read it. It gives a pretty succinct history of American public schools and what some of our problems are. And I think that outlines my campaign pretty darn well. Thank you.
Now we'll hear a closing statement from Dr. Parrott.
My name is Lois Parrott, and I'm running for the Texas State Board of Education. I'm running because I believe that every child deserves a quality education. And I know how important education is. And I know that education is so important because I am a teacher. And I teach at Richland College, and I'm a former Texas certified public school teacher. And I know how important it is to properly fund our schools. And you know, we have been supported by the representation for 28 years in this area, District 12, for 28 years by the same representation. And now, are we looking at a shiny star of Texas, or are we looking at the ranking of Texas dropping to number 49 in funding? This is the question I'm asking you, and to look at the differences and your choice tonight, because, you know, we have a problem with the funding. My opposition does not think that the $5.4 billion should even be restored into
Dr.
the
Parrott.
classroom. And we are overcrowded in the classrooms. With teachers, they're teaching to the test, but we can do better. We can have teachers that don't have to teach to the test. We can have fully funded classrooms, and we can have good textbooks that are properly vetted and based on evidence. And I'm asking you for your support, because I want to work for you on the state board. And so please, will you vote for me? My name is Lois Parrott.
And now a closing statement from Ms. Miller.
Thank you for having us tonight, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. I'm Tyncee Miller. I've been on the state board on and off since 1984. I'm passionate about kids learning to read and learning well. My background as a reading expert, trained and taught in the reading laboratory at Scottish Rite Hospital under Dr. Lucius Waits. That is where I learned how to teach kids to read. If we can learn there the science of our language, then any teacher can learn how to teach any child to read and read well. And that is the basis of learning, is being able to read, isn't it? I've been able to see the first dyslexia law passed in our state and our nation, and it's still going strong. I've seen the first phonics-based curriculum implemented in 1997 when Governor George Bush was our governor who took on reading as his goal. And then we updated the reading again 10 years later and made it stronger and better. And we've got great books that are now out in the schools. So, and then the one thing that I've really been passionate about is protecting our precious kids' textbook fund. That, as I said earlier, it belongs to the children, and the revenue that we make from our investments that are very clear and very transparent, as I call squeaky clean, we make sure that all of our kids have some form of instructional material in their schools, and it's free. Thank you. I ask for your support and your vote. Thank you.
And now let's show all of the candidates our appreciation for coming out tonight and sitting in the hot seat.
Thank you, Janice, for doing such a wonderful job moderating. It is not easy. And thank you to our candidates again for being here tonight. And audience, thank you all for being here tonight. The forum will be available online. Please let your friends know. The link will come out through the League of Women Voters that we get everyone to watch and be an educated voter. And thank you all and have a great night.